When it comes to financial education and literacy, it is really up to you to take ownership of it. Today's video is going to be a week's compilation looking at things like Gen Z and millennials that are crushing it with ETFs, ditching some of Dave Ramsey's really outdated information, and of course, investing like Warren Buffett with a very small amount of money. So I hope you like the content. Please subscribe to the channel if you do, and let's go ahead and get into it. When did you start investing into ETFs? For me, that is about 20 years ago when I started with those exchange traded funds, really starting out very basic and understanding with those ETFs how to invest and where to invest. Up until that point, I had been using mutual funds, which were very expensive. I seen monthly fees, I seen annual fees, I seen management fees. There were so many fees associated with it. It was really disheartening when it comes to investing. Now, according to an annual report by NASDAQ, millennials and Gen Zers are the two most likely to invest in ETFs, which if you know, and if you followed any of my videos, ETFs are the one and only thing that I invest in. Looking at 81% of millennials, 75% of Gen Zers are invested and will invest into ETFs, which I know is really a game changer. When you look at the current growth of retail ETFs, it is kind of crazy. They are not going away, and they've only gained in popularity in the last couple of years. So why ETFs? So when it comes to ETFs listed on the US exchange, it has hit a record-breaking 900 billion in inflows with 600 ETFs launching this year alone, according to ETF.com. Now, ETF.com, of course, is a site that I've used for a lot of different things, including comparisons between different ETFs, but we're talking $900 billion in here. It has grown in popularity. It has grown in really overall and generally in part because of the lower fee structure, which was killing me when I was invested in mutual funds. They are very costly. And of course, there is a big tax benefit when it comes to those ETFs versus in comparison to the mutual funds. But if you're old school Dave Ramsey, he still sells those mutual funds, but it seems like the managed accounts are slowly going away because they're easier to buy, they're easier to sell with ETFs. Now, mutual funds, you can only trade once a day. That is at the close of business. For a majority of ETFs, you can buy and sell them whenever you want to. If you're changing positions, it is a lot different, the structure itself, than when it comes to mutual funds. If you're an active investor, and again, you want to make some of those changes or make some adjustments, the mutual funds won't process in real time. You'll have to wait till after the market closes to go ahead and make those adjustments. Now, also, when you look at index funds, they have a 0.44 average annual fee. That is right. You are talking less than 0.5% when it comes to an annual fee. When you start looking at mutual funds, it is double. It is a 0.88 fee that you're seeing on an annual basis. And of course, similar active ETFs carry a 0.63 fee versus over 1% for an actively managed mutual fund, which we know a lot of those. Even thinking of my S&P 500 fund with Vanguard, there is a version that is actively managed that is actually a mutual fund version. They call them, I believe it is Admiral shares when it comes to Vanguard, but you can get the exact same thing in a managed version. But if you followed Warren Buffett, if you followed some of the greats, majority of financial advisors, even building up those mutual funds, managing those mutual funds, cannot and do not beat the ETFs or beat the index themselves, the market itself. And when you start going out, 30, 40 years, less than, 90% of active investors or active traders can beat the index itself. Now, of course, as ETFs, the big thing with this is the capital gains tax. When you see the difference is the tax efficiency. Younger investors, really smart, a lot more well-researched, well-read. Starting in there are no surprises. So what can we look for in ETFs? First one, research what you have exposure to. There are 3,800 US listed ETFs as it sits today, and they are super transparent. This is something, again, when it comes to the nuts and bolts of investing, when you start looking at calls, inputs, and options and everything else, it can be super confusing, even for someone who has studied it for a while. When you start looking and breaking down ETFs, their disclosings, and their holdings are very transparent when you can see exactly what you're putting into, whether it is a different sector, what companies are in, what industries, what risk you're exposed to. ETF issuer's website, just like we've seen with Vanguard, makes it, again, super transparent when it comes to ETF. So if a fund says international, if it says, IT, informational technology, you can kind of break down exactly what it is, but you can look at international funds. You can see what countries they fall into, what classifications the fund focuses on, exactly how it's built. You can drill down in those ETFs and find exactly what you're investing in, which, like I've said before, and it is a rule that is number one when it comes to investing. You have to know what you're investing into. If you don't understand ETFs, if you don't understand mutual funds, do your research, do all of your own research, know exactly what you're putting your money into, even looking at some of the companies you're putting it into. And of course, when it comes to cryptocurrency or anything like that, know exactly what you're putting your money into. So the second take note is the wash sale rules. This again is the really big difference when it comes to ETFs and why I love them. Be mindful about the so-called wash sale rule. What this means is that writing off losses and then buying an identical security within 30 days after the sale will be a wash. So if some people are selling these to go ahead and get a tax write-off, it is not as easy as we think when it comes to ETFs. If you sell an ETF at a loss and you buy it back with a similar one in that 30-day window, you will not get the tax benefit. And some people do this when it comes to tax loss harvesting. Overall, it's pretty interesting to see, but of course you can get around this. You just have to be careful how you handle it. And if you're looking to do this and really adding to the cost basis or taking losses to offset your tax basis, definitely work with an absolute professional when it comes to getting that tax wash. Now, when it comes to ETFs in the general, when it comes to Warren Buffett and the S&P 500, I invest in the VOO. That is the Vanguard S&P 500 index fund. This is one that Warren Buffett was saying 90% of your portfolio, that's right, 90% of your portfolio should just be in an index fund like the S&P 500. And of course, when you think of the longevity, he has been betting on it and he has been doing incredibly well. Even if you look at the fund this year, you're up almost 30% in the last 12 months. That is huge. I know it's not traditional and it's not going to be every year that we're seeing it, but when you start looking at the average of something like that S&P 500 fund, where you can hold that ETF, you can put money into that ETF on a consistent basis. It is going to grow. It is an index that is market cap weighted, meaning you're going to have the most exposure into the high tech sector. So we're looking at your Apples, your Google, Nvidia, a lot of those really large mega cap tech companies are going to be the majority of the purchase when you're getting into the S&P 500, but that is by design. That is the market, that is the industry. When you start looking at the index is rebalanced on a quarterly basis, but when you start thinking of overall investing, it is super easy to go ahead and invest in something like the S&P 500 index and then just set it and forget it. Now, for me personally, I do this and I build a 3-fund ETF portfolio. I've done this for an incredible long time, honestly. When you look back about 10 years, I've been doing the same thing. So I invest in something that is just a core ETF, which of course is going to be our S&P 500 index. I invest in something that is going to be a growth, like the VUG, the Vanguard Really Growth Fund, getting a lot more exposure to the tech side. Now, between both of those, having the tech side, having the exposure to that S&P 500, I know there's an overlap, and again, that is by design. And the final one of the 3 ETF portfolio that I put it into is something that is going to produce income, that is going to be something that does produce dividends, and the dividends are going to be reinvested right in back into the portfolio, meaning that if anything's underperforming, it is going to invest it right back in there, picking something like the HD, which is something that I love and I personally invest in when it comes to investing. And again, very basic overall portfolio. Definitely want to break out and talk about these ETFs because a lot of people have a lot of questions, and ETFs are the only way that I invest. I do not buy and I do not own any individual stocks in their entirety. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next video. Could you regret putting too much money into the 401k? This is a conversation that I actually had a little bit earlier today. Putting a lot, or putting 20, 30, 40% of your income, tapping out that 401k contributions every single year. Does it make sense to be doing this? And how much and what is the drawback from over-investing into your investment account? Now, of course, the big one for this, putting a lot of money into a 401k over an extended amount of time, and I'm talking 20, 30 years, with the growth factor of there, depending how it is invested, you could see a really large 401k balance, which means all of the tax benefit that you were hoping to write off if you're doing a traditional methodology, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. But putting all of your money in there is putting kind of all of the eggs in one basket, only having the diversification of investing in only that 401k. But the nest egg can actually get to a point where you can be required to take RMDs in the future, and those RMDs can put you into a much higher tax bracket or the exact same tax bracket that you were in. So essentially, I was kind of looking around this. I was playing with an RMD calculator where if you get to the point where, let's say, your 401k has roughly $3 million. Now, I know that is a really big balance over the extended life and the growth factor of the 401k. But if you're making regular contributions, if you're capping that thing out, and even if you're putting money into different avenues like IRAs, things like that, you could get to the point where you could actually be required to take those required minimum distributions in the first year on a $3 million portfolio. You're talking about pulling around $120,000 out of that portfolio. Now, of course, this is only for one individual. If you do have a spouse and you're both required to take RMDs, could really amplify that tax bracket, which is what I'm kind of thinking about. And overall, we have toned down the contributions into our 401k to use other methods instead of maxing it out in the entirety, which again, it seems like there is a little bit of downside to over investing. Now, of course, when you think of the 401k plan, if you have to do any early withdrawals, if you have to take everything out, if you have to remove anything out of there, there can be a lot of penalties if you're not old enough to take money out, or if you're taking it out prematurely, you're going to have to pay your ordinary tax income on that. Even when you're retired, of course, this can be tens of thousands of dollars a year, depending on the balance, if you're taking money out of that when you're doing withdrawals. They are estimated currently losing about 25% of each 401k distribution to federal and state tax. So when you think of the double kind of the taxation, both the federal level and the state level, that is a lot of taxes. So if I'm at the point with an RMD where I have to take $100,000 out of that RMD every single year with the tax bracket of 25%, I'm essentially taking out my RMD of $100,000. I am only seeing 75,000 of that. 25,000 is going right to Uncle Sam. It is going right to pay the taxes, which of course, when you start looking at retirement, let's say you start taking these RMDs at 73, you live a full long life, you're 100 years old. Guess what? You had 27 years that you've been paying taxes on this money every single year, which is kind of crazy. And of course, the mandatory withdrawals are what kind of get people. And this is the reason, again, I'm going to show you and really walk through the scenarios and the ones that we're looking at and how we're really building this when it comes to a 401k. Now, the big drawback that we see, of course, is the flexibility and being required to access funds once you hit that age 72, which I believe now it is going to 73 with those RMDs. And again, whether you need the money or not, you're going to have to take the money. You're going to have to pay taxes on the money. Even if you're taking those withdrawals and reinvesting them, you are going to have to leave it, which means you're going to be missing out on the compounding effect that we see. And of course, that is the eighth wonder of the world. When it comes to compounding, you could leave the funds in there. You could give it a couple more years to compound. However, at age 73, you are required and mandated by the IRS to take money out. Now, of course, it might not be beneficial when you're taking money out. If we are seeing a lot of stock market volatility, thinking back a couple years where the stock market was down 22, 23%, then you're pulling your 100,000 out of there for that RMD. This can really be and learn a hard lesson when you're accessing your funds when the market is down, 25%. Then you do your RMD, which of course is going to be a little bit less because the value is less, but that is based on the previous year. But when you take your RMD, now you have to pay taxes on top of the market being down 20%, which of course can be kind of crazy. Now, for me personally, the way that we're doing this is we do not want everything tied up into a 401k. So when we think of our financial order of operations, looking at a 401k contributions, getting the matching contribution is the base. For instance, my employer does 7%. I put in 7%. That is my base contribution. You at least want to get that base. You want to get the the maximum amount that you can pull out of that 7% or out of your employer match. And of course, this is built as part of your compensation package. If you're not putting money into that 401k, if you're not making regular contributions, you are leaving part of your paycheck, you're leaving part of the compensation package that your company offers on the table. Now, of course, with this, when you're putting it in there, then we start looking at HSAs. If you're eligible for an HSA, this is a triple tax advantage account. That is the reason why, again, We do the 401k up to the matching. Then we start looking at our HSAs. Then we look at the possibilities of doing IRAs. And then, of course, once we're done with that, once we do that base match, then we start looking at the Roth variation. So, of course, I'm really planning, and the way that I've kind of mapped it out is when I look at my contributions, if I'm putting, let's say, 30% into my portfolio, I want roughly 30% of that to go into a traditional, that is going into a tax advantage account, that is going into a traditional 401k. On the other side of that, I have 70% of my contributions that are going into the Roth variant up until the 401k maximum that we're allowed. Now, this is going to vary depending on your financial situation, and it's also going to vary and really dependent on what ETFs, what bonds, what stocks, what your 401k provider has to offer in your portfolio. A lot of people will be better off just putting and doing the matching. Again, let's say it's at 7% in that 401k, taking the rest of their money, doing something like a Roth IRA or doing something like a traditional brokerage account because they do not offer and they do not have a great lineup in the 401k, or they charge an exorbitant amount of fees. I have seen this as well, where you have monthly fees, you have annual fees, you have maintenance fees, you have a lot of fees that are eating into all of your contributions, which you have to be very aware of. Also, when it comes to 401ks, a lot of times some of the money can be incredibly difficult to get through and really get to in the case of an emergency. Might take a while to get funds that are needed, where for me, having a traditional brokerage account just on the side, I have money that I can have access to, honestly, almost same day. I can sell the same day that I can move the funds. Funds are available in my bank account the next day. So if I do need liquidity, if I do need availability to funds, does make it a lot easier when it comes to having those traditional brokerage accounts. But again, there are a lot of 401k rules. There's a lot of different ways. So my thought though is putting only that 30% into the traditional or 401k with that contribution. That is going to be the part that I'm going to be required to take RMDs. That is the part that I want to keep my income during retirement under a certain tax bracket to really make it beneficial. So for instance, right now, if we're in that 25% tax bracket, being in an 18% tax bracket during retirement is essentially going to save me that 6%. But you also have to remember in calculating in the growth. So if I'm putting in X amount of dollars every single year and I'm seeing roughly 8 to 10% growth, what is it going to look like in 30 years with that nest egg ballooning to a point through contributions and through the growth factor? How much am I going to have to take out in RMDs? So I might even have to adjust it, tone it back a little bit. And of course, I do work with a tax advisor. I have a financial advisor. I have a lot of individuals being in the financial industry myself that I do have access to. And of course, you do as well. There's a lot of places that offer a lot of financial education and counseling absolutely for free. You can sit down with a financial advisor. A lot of it is free. Tax advisors, usually not. I haven't found many free ones of those. But overall, you can come up with a big plan. So when you get into retirement, it is about diversifying your income sources in retirement, having some in that 401k, having some in the HSA, looking at the money we have in IRAs, also looking at company stock that we do hold that is personally held, but also looking at the traditional brokerage accounts. Then we have money in high yield savings accounts, also have a couple CDs out there. So when you think of diversifying the income stream, we have a lot of different ways to take it. And ultimately, once we get to the point of taking Social Security, then we have those traditional 401ks. That is going to be the income to supplement us through all of retirement when we're required to take them RMDs. And on the other side, when it comes to the money we have in savings, when it comes to the Roth variant, that is the money that we are growing, and it's going to compound all the time. That it's really during retirement. We're going to see a big compounding factor as it continues to grow. That is what we're going to be using as generational wealth. That is what is going to be passed to our heirs. And that is the plan that my wife and I do have and we came up with. Been working incredibly well. We're working really towards it every single day, living the debt-free journey. The only thing we have left in a couple more years on the house, we are completely debt-free, even looking at getting a new vehicle, which in that case, we don't want to finance it. We don't want, 4, 5, 6% interest. We want to go ahead and pay for it, just pay for it cash, be done with it. Then we own it outright. It is free and clear in its entirety, not paying interest, because there's really two kind of people. One is you have one side where you're paying interest, money's leaving your bank account, you're paying your mortgage, your credit cards, you're paying your debt, you're paying for your auto loans, you're paying for everything over an extended amount of time. which costs a lot of money. The flip side of that is you have a lot of money invested, you have it in CDs, savings accounts, you have it in the market, it's earning you money, it's generating income. And guess what? I am not paying out when it comes to really paying out a lot of money in interest. I do not do it at all, even on my home loan. Really on the fence with keeping the house or just investing all the money instead of paying it off faster, because we are at 2.5% interest. So it does make a really big difference on how much and what kind of return that we can see that is higher than that 2.5%. All right, guys, so that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next video. Improving your finances can take a lot of time and dedication, whether you want to save your first dollar, your first 100, or your first 100,000. Today's video, we're going to be looking at small changes and tweaks that you can do to improve your financial health. And really, these are pretty easy when you think of the small changes, and really the things we do day to day on a basis add up. When you start looking at a month, you've been doing it for 30 days. When you look at a year, 365 over a decade can change your entire life. Now, the first one we look, switching to a high yield savings account. For me personally, this was a game changer when it comes to your emergency fund. Like we've always said with the emergency fund, you want to keep that liquid. You want to keep it in a high yield savings account. We don't want to be locking up in investments. We do not want to be putting that into CDs. We want to keep it liquid just in case an emergency happens. And to maximize this, it is those high yield savings accounts. Now, I do have a link down below for M1 Finance. Their high yield savings account is 4.25%. That is higher still than a lot of savings accounts. That is also higher than a lot of CD rates that banks are offering. You have to maximize your savings and maximize the money you get in that emergency fund. Even for instance, let's say your emergency fund, you're saving $15,000. You have $15,000 in there. Every single time that you're getting dividends, that you're getting interest in there, you could be using that money to repay debt. You could be using it for a lot of different things, or just letting it accumulate in there. When you start looking at the national savings rate, it is a 0.45. You are talking less than 0.5%, which means all the money you're keeping in that savings account is getting eaten up in its entirety by interest. Even looking at high yield savings accounts, majority of them are 4% plus. So make sure you're parking that money into that high yield savings account and anything that you do have liquid. Second one we look at is automating your savings. This for me was a game changer. I have literally automated everything. And again, going back to M1 Finance, we are doing investments on a weekly basis. For my kids, we're doing it every 2 weeks. We have automated the savings, and we have automated it in a really big way. So the way that I break it down is we make regular contributions to that high yield savings account, keeping it well above where we do want that emergency fund. Anything above that is being invested on a regular basis. So we actually have an account that will cap at a certain amount of money. For me personally, that is the $30,000 threshold. That is what we have in our emergency fund. That is what is earning that 4.25% in that high yield savings. So even when I do get dividends, if I do get interest on there, which they pay every month, if it goes above that 30,000 mark, it is automatically, that is right, that is the word that I use, put into an investment account. And this is put on an investment account every single week. Me making regular contributions, and of course, part of my paycheck automatically goes into that high yield savings account, which then is automatically, like we said, put into the investment accounts, still keeping my emergency fund 100% intact, earning a pretty good rate of return, earning a really good rate of return on all the investment accounts we have. And this is very, very easy, very simplified with just depositing money in there on a regular basis. Now, of course, you can start and really fine tune this. So let's say, for instance, you start with $25 every paycheck. That's going in there. You get a raise, you get a little bit more money, bumping it up to 30, going to 40, doing 50. You'll get to a point where through those little incremental increases, it will improve your finances in a major way till you get that fully funded emergency fund. Then you can start looking at building out and really starting to invest. Now, third one we look at really is two different variations. Number one, making those 401k contributions, at least getting that matching that your employer offers. If you're not getting it, and if you have chosen not to make contributions to the 401k, if you do not have it, guys, it is free money. There is literally no place in the world that you're going to be guaranteed a 100% return, regardless of what it's invested in, regardless of how this works. Getting a 100% return on your money is going to be huge. Once we start looking and maxing out or getting that employer match, let's say again, for instance, you get 7%. So you start putting 7% in there. Then you start looking at your HSA accounts and also the Roth IRAs. Now, when it comes to 401ks in general, do the Roth variation if you have the ability to. Like I've said time and time again, when you start looking at the benefits that we see with the Roth IRA and also with that Roth 401k variation, it does make sense to make it super easy, super automated, very convenient to kind of set it and forget it. If you start putting the 7% in, again, getting that match, then you get a raise. You are keeping your raise in the entirety because you're already contributing that 7%. And of course, this can make a really big difference. Now, the fourth one we get into, paying your credit card weekly versus monthly. A lot of people dread the bill they get every single month. And of course, paying it weekly really has a different psychological factor. So what I see a majority of times is people will rack up their entire monthly expenses onto one card. At the end of the month, they don't have the money to pay off that one single card. So it really just accumulates and snowballs. Then when you couple in a 23, 25, 27% interest rate on there, the snowball just goes faster and faster. Now, if you start doing this every single time you get paid, kind of looking at your budget real quick, putting what you can towards that card, you can knock it down, using the debt snowball or the debt avalanche method. I really do and really focus on building out and utilizing that debt avalanche method. That is the methodology of taking your highest interest rate down to your lowest interest rate, and every single dollar that you're putting on these cards are going to that number one, that highest interest rate to knock that out first. Paying for really dollar for dollar, you're going to get more of a return when you're putting it into the debt avalanche method because it is at a much higher rate that you're getting money. I don't want you focusing on something that's 0% or something that is a very low fixed rate. For instance, credit unions, they have fixed rate credit cards, and even though it's a credit card, they run 9.75%, so a pretty good rate versus the traditional 22, 25 like we said. When it comes to that, knocking it out systematically, not on the balances, but on the interest rate that it has itself. And then, of course, when it comes to budgeting, there is not a time that I will not talk about budgeting, the financial plan, whatever it may be. You could even do it old school, pen and paper, writing down everything. Me personally, Excel spreadsheets work very well, but you could also go the route of budgeting apps. There are a crazy amount of companies that offer a lot of budgeting apps, and the ability to go through there, even connecting a multitude of bank accounts, putting it all into one place, just like we see advertisements for like Rocket Money, or Dave Ramsey has one as well. There's a couple really good tools, and a lot of these tools are completely free to you. Yeah, when you're going in there, there could be offers for different things, but of course you can skip the offers. You can go ahead and just eliminate that noise, but you can use them. And of course, if you know your finances, this is really the basis when it comes to financial counseling. And I do this professionally. When it comes to that financial counseling piece, knowing where your money goes. First bucket, you get paid. Second bucket, you pay all of your bills. Where does that go? Every single dollar, you got to know where it goes. And I know, again, a lot of people will say, well, you don't really need to know where every dollar goes. You don't, to a point, but I would really stress it when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to a budgeting app, you should do it at least at the beginning. The beginning, it might be a little bit more difficult. You'll see it's a little bit more tedious. Then you'll realize quickly that a lot of expenses that you have are fixed expenses. Your car payment is not changing. Your rent or your mortgage payment is not changing. There are a lot of things once you start budgeting that become super easy because they are fixed expenses. The ones you have to worry about is the variable expenses. And then when you actually see, again, kind of dollar for dollar, where those variable expenses are at, really what you want to accomplish. Where can you eliminate, another $10, $20, $50 here or there? Where can you shop for different things, getting it a little bit cheaper? It is really going to be those small incremental changes that we talk about that are going to change your financial picture and really your overall financial well-being, I guess, is what I'd call. If you try to tackle it all at once, it can be very overwhelming. But we are talking about taking very small bites out of this financial plan and really getting ready. I mean, when you think about it, switching money to a high yield savings account, that is a no-brainer. 38% of savings accounts are still at traditional banks with an average of a 0.45. When you start looking at the automation for you and I, technology is something that we utilize and we utilize on a regular basis. Automate your contributions to your 401k. Automate it to the HSA. Automate them to the IRA. Automate all of your payments. Simplify your life and make it super easy financially, making contributions into those retirement accounts, and of course, paying off your credit card. Credit card debt, honestly, that I see is the number one biggest struggle that I see of Americans overall. When you look at the absorbent amount of credit card debt that we have as a nation, it will cripple you and it will cripple your financial future if you ever want to live debt free, if you ever want to be on the other side of it, where they're actually paying you for the money that you have versus you paying for everything that you bought previously. When you think about some credit cards, people have had them for 10, 20, 30 years. The same credit card, the same balance, haven't paid off, haven't consolidated. They have literally just been kicking that interest payment that they're having every single month right down the road, taking away the ability to live a debt-free life, taking away the ability to invest that money as well. All right, guys, so that is going to do it. 5 small changes that can improve your finances in a really big way. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. And as always, thank you guys for watching. When it comes to financial gurus, Dave Ramsey is one of the best, but there are a few things within the 7 baby steps that I don't really agree with, and I want to be covering them in this video today. So looking at Dave Ramsey, if you spend any time in personal finance, if you've seen him online and know who he is, Total Money Makeover, step-by-step program, baby steps to get out of debt, using the snowball method instead of the avalanche method, which I absolutely do love. But there are some questionable things, again, that he kind of looks at. And the first one is don't invest until the debt is paid off. This, of course, is step number 2, which is very vigorously, really, for a lot of people, unrealistic to pay off debt in the example that he sets of really beans and rice, which of course is not just eating beans and rice, but literally scrapping everything in your entire life. Now, being a financial counselor myself, what I have seen is when it comes to debt and when it comes to paying off debt to this extreme, there is a very, very small amount of people that can actually do this, taking control of their money, building up a budget, getting an emergency fund. And of course, the first baby step that he covers is getting $1,000 in emergency fund. And then, like I said, that second baby step is just like fire, is putting every single dollar until the debt is gone in its entirety. For a lot of Americans, this could mean years, could even be decades before the debt is entirely eliminated, meaning you're not getting any of the investing out of your portfolio. You're not seeing any of the retirement planning. And without investing, you're not seeing the company match. You're not seeing the tax benefits. There are a lot of things that you're missing when it doesn't come and when you really put off this step of investing. Now, I do agree when you look at, debt itself, there is a point of debt where credit card debt I could agree with, but when it comes to the rest of the debt, when you're thinking of auto loan debt, when you think of the lower interest debt, it doesn't make sense to really rush it and burn it down like fire to get it completely done. When we start looking at credit card debt as a nation, $6,000 to $8,000, which is the average household on how much debt they're carrying, and roughly $24,000 in auto loan debt they are carrying as well, which again could take many, many years, even going and putting all of your money into it before you ever get there. And like I had said, that is missing out on compounding interest. You're missing out on 401k match. You're essentially missing out on free money by using this methodology, which is the reason why me personally, getting that $1,000 set aside, yes, I definitely agree with that. Having something to keep you from really continuing on the debt cycle, borrowing more money, and if anything should happen, people go right back to borrowing on credit cards, borrowing on unsecured debt. Saving that first $1,000 does make sense. Second one I would say is going in, getting a 401k, getting that full match. And then, of course, aiming it into that high interest debt, looking at the credit card debt, trying to get rid of that quickly, and then going back and probably doing a little bit more of the investing side of it before I start paying off some of the vehicles or some of the lower interest debt. Second one, don't focus on a credit score. Now, being in the financial industry, this is one of those where Ramsey really argues that credit scores are not important, that people don't need credit cards, and he calls it a I love debt score. But the big thing is when you think of a credit score, it is not just to borrow money. When you start looking and expanding that horizon into other things, when you start looking for, let's say, getting an apartment, guess what? You got to have a credit card. Or excuse me, not a credit card, you got to have a credit score. Credit cards do help build your credit score. Credit cards also, if used as a tool, if used properly, if paid off in full, can make a big difference in having a good score. But even looking outside of that, when you start looking at a score in general, it could mean the difference between getting a job or not getting a job because of your credit score. When you start looking at car insurance companies, when you look at cell phone providers, they base your rate on your credit score. If you don't have a credit score, you are going to get a much higher rate. For auto insurance, you're going to get a much higher rate. For cell phone services, there are a lot of things, again, including employers that use this for the job and really the consideration. That is another, again, kind of fallacy that I see, is not having a score at all could be very detrimental. Now, of course, when you get to a point of having enough assets, let's say you're at, 100,000, 500,000, $1 million in assets. Credit scores at that point, when you get to that level of the game, don't have the impact and don't really make a difference. When you're generating enough revenue through income, when you're generating enough revenue through dividends, when you're getting, interest, when you're getting a lot of other things, you're on the other side of the equation, but it takes a lot to get there. When you get to the point where, hey, do I need a credit score to get a vehicle? The answer for a lot of people that are on that side, no, I can pay cash for a vehicle. If it's $30,000, if it's $50,000, we can purchase it outright. We don't need a credit score at all. We have no need for it at all. And the last one that we look at is paying a mortgage off early. Now, for me, he is a big advocate of paying down the mortgage early. Now, honestly, being completely debt-free in the debt-free journey makes sense. For me, at a certain point in life, I do want to be completely debt-free. I am on the debt-free journey. I want to eliminate the mortgage, but at what expense? When I look at the opportunity cost of one, putting a lot of extra money towards my mortgage, or two, investing the difference, it also depends on your interest rate. If you're looking at an individual that's sitting at 6-7% interest rate, which is current environment of what we have, or if you see someone like myself that is sitting at 2.5%, chances are if I'm investing the money, I can make a lot more than 2.5%. And if you looked at the S&P 500 this year, it has been absolutely wildfire. If you're investing in Bitcoin, it's been crazy as well. There are so many investment vehicles right now that are doing incredibly easy or really doing incredibly well, where if I took my funds and I put it all towards the mortgage, I wouldn't be seeing these gains. I wouldn't be seeing the big portfolio that I have. Now, my plan to paying off a mortgage early is building up my investment portfolio over the next 5 years at the age of 50, taking what I need out of that portfolio, paying off the mortgage in full, being done with it, and allowing me essentially from 50 to 60 or 65 when we plan to retire to really just go all in kind of crazy when it comes to investing and really building up that portfolio, getting it ready for retirement. That way we don't have to worry about it. Now, of course, when you get to the point of paying off early, you're meaning that getting, again, the financial, the FOO or the financial order of operations, when you get to paying down the mortgage, you have everything already set. You have 15% going into your 401k or a combination of IRAs. You have your HSA that's fully funded. You also do have all of your other investment vehicles, including MESP programs for your children, if you have them, is fully invested at this point before you get to paying off the mortgage. But like I said, even where I can bulk up, and I have really bulked up and built up those investment accounts, where if I ever did need the money, right now I have enough and I've already passed the mark that I could pull the money out of an investment account, pay the taxes, pay off the mortgage, be completely done. But when I'm looking at running off and really paying off that 2.5% mortgage, it doesn't make sense to me. I am very driven by mathematics, looking at the reason. And I know, of course, they say paying off the mortgage early might financially not make sense. But when it comes to the psychological aspect, when it comes to the sense of well-being, that a lot of people will go ahead and pay off the mortgage because, of course, they cannot take a house that doesn't have a mortgage or is mortgage free. They can if you don't have taxes. So if you're sitting at a mortgage really below 4%, well, the S&P this last decade is yielding 12.8%. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like I said, if I'm looking at the S&P 500 yielding 12.8%, my mortgage is at 2.5%. It really makes different. I know there's market fluctuation. I know there's risk associated with it. But when I look at the return of what I'm getting in the market and really the amount of money we're putting into the market, it's kind of a no-brainer for me to continue that cycle, even if we have a down year. I am looking at the average performance of the S&P 500, and let's say right now that's, I believe, 10.4%. Even if it runs just at that average, I am still up 7.4 or 7.5%, 7.9% technically, if it has the exact same run rate in the future, meaning I'm making 7% on my money instead of paying off the mortgage in the entirety. So guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Now looking again, talking about the 7 baby steps, those are really the 3 that kind of, I feel like they need to be revamped or they need to be adjusted, maybe relooked at. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about Dave Ramsey and what you think of those baby steps. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Can you imagine being the investor that has over $80 billion invested in the market? And of course, on that note, we're talking about Warren Buffett. when it comes to inspiration, when it comes to investing principles, he is probably the absolute best strategist, the Oracle of Omaha, sage advice from buying stocks, buying index funds, managing cash flow, and of course, Berkshire Hathaway's CEO. However, when it comes to investing like Buffett, how can you do this on a lower level or even with a smaller amount of money? That's exactly what we're going to be looking at in today's video. 6 ways to invest tiny sums of money according to Warren Buffett, starting with number 1, investing early. When you start looking at the importance of investing early, this really harnesses that power of compounding interest. It is super significant. The earlier that you start putting money away, regardless of if it's $10, $20, $50, whatever it is, the more time you're giving your money to grow. When you think of it like a snowball going down the hill, at the very beginning, it's going to be tiny. As it continues down a very long hill, as it continues getting larger and larger, and the balances continue to get higher as contributions go up and contributions stay consistent, the snowball will get to the point that it is just a mammoth size of investment portfolio that is going down the hill. Now, no matter your risk tolerance, when you look at millionaires and when you look at self-made millionaires, majority of them, over 90%, are from investing in the market. So of course, when you look at diversification, we always talk about ETFs. Specifically, I talk about the S&P 500. Index fund investing is the way, honestly, even looking at Warren Buffett, he says index fund investing, everybody should be in the S&P 500 index. And I really do believe that, and I invest in it myself through a multitude of ways. Now, second one we look at is diving into the stock market and looking for discounts. Now, he is notorious for discount shopping, looking for good deals, looking for recommendations, looking for businesses that are at a discount. Now, this does take a lot of time and effort. Now, personally, for me, looking at the market and looking for companies that have strong fundamentals, good growth potential, I do not invest in individual stocks. I do not, and I have not really in probably almost 30 years do I invest into any single stocks. But when you start looking at Buffett's advice, the biggest one is investments over time on the value of the company, not really what social media is telling you, not really what is focusing around the news where they are, but looking and breaking down the nuts and bolts of what those companies do bring. Now, third one, he talks about focusing on smaller companies. Before investing in some of those top stocks like Bank of America, Coca-Cola, he mentioned the best period that an investor is starting with a small sum of money, is taking a little more risk, looking at some of the smaller companies that you can pick up with a higher growth potential. Now, it's kind of interesting because looking through this article, a lot of people are saying, a lot of financial advisors, a lot of forecasters are saying that a small growth company, so outside the S&P 500, but looking at your small cap companies are willing to do the work. There's no question that you have an opportunity to get very large returns, again, with small cap companies because they are a lot smaller. And of course, if you're looking at something like an ETF, there is ETFs and there are ETFs out there that focus on small cap companies in the US market. So it could be another strategy really breaking it down. Now, the fourth one, don't worry about the short-term fluctuation. This is one of the biggest ones. When you think of your index funds, when you think of investing in general, what happens is people will put money into the market. Let's say they put $100 in there. All of a sudden next week, it's at $94. They sell it immediately. They take that $6 loss. They're out of the market. They don't want to do it. They felt and really emotionally tied to where their investment is. This is where you have to really zoom out and looking at 5 years. When we talk about investment strategies, when we even talking about doing this with tiny sums of money, it is about looking at a 5-year picture. When you start, again, zooming out even further, looking at the S&P performance over the last 10 years, it goes much higher. When we even start zooming out further than that, looking at the average return of over 10% for the S&P 500, again, you can look at the long-term growth potential, not the 30 days, not the 6 months, not the 1 year, but we are talking 5 years plus, not worrying about that short-term fluctuation. And also, it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of dedication. Like I had to learning about the stock market and understanding exactly what you're investing in, but also using it as mathematical equations versus emotional investing. Investing in companies that you like because you hear it on the news, you hear it on social media. I advise you to do your own research, know exactly what you're investing in. If you want to invest again in ETFs, if you're thinking cryptocurrency, REITs, if you're going into real estate, whatever it is, you have to know exactly what you're investing in. And it's going to be investing over a consistent amount of time to really see that growth. Now, the fifth one he talks about, be prepared for hard work. This, of course, is something when you're investing with small sums of money, just like when he started out, requires effort, requires research of the companies. He warns investors never take it easy or should never be really easy. Looking for great investment opportunities do require a little bit of work, knowing exactly what you're getting into. And I also say this, there's a lot of people that chase easy money. When you think of things like get rich quick, you give me $5,000, I'll give you $50,000 back. It's very easy to chase the money, but it doesn't make logical sense. Majority of the time, when you start looking at, a trading bot, you want it easy, you want a trading bot, you want it to do all the work itself. It usually doesn't work like that. And even if some people do have success, there's always a greater number of people that lose an incredible amount of money. They talk about, oh, I made $100,000 trading cryptocurrency. That is not the normal, guys. A lot of people go in, they invest in something they don't understand. They see it fluctuate down. All of a sudden they sell out and that's it. They're done in their entirety. And the final one he talks about is diversification, but not too much. Now, while diversification is very important to mitigate risk, he believes on focusing on a few great opportunities. Diversification is a protection against ignorance. Pretty interesting statement when you think of ETFs because they offer instant diversification. Makes very little sense for those who know exactly what they're doing in the market. For me, like I said, generally, I don't want to spend the time and effort researching individual companies, getting into, a 2,000 page document that is provided from companies to break down everything you need to do in there. So it's not too easy. And when we think about diversification as well, in relationship to 401k plans, you look at target date funds, very well diversified, but is invested in a bunch of different things. ETFs, again, majority of individuals, we're talking about Gen Z, talking about millennials, north of 80% of those segments invest in ETFs and they love ETFs. Now, of course, the older brother, the more expensive brother, mutual funds are managed by an individual. So if you want to pay for a financial advisor, it is going to come with a little bit higher of a price tag. But overall, if you start investing, and of course, do not put all of your eggs into one basket or all your funds into one basket. The way that I advise to do it is if you're new to investing, if you have a small sum of money, is get into the market, whether it's getting into Robinhood, whether it's M1 Finance. We have some links down below to get involved, but putting $50 in there, putting $100 in there, just staying with a very small amount, learning exactly what you're investing in, exactly what it means to be invested, watch the market, see the trends, do your research, knowing exactly what you're doing. Like I said, for me personally, I do a ton of research when it comes to exchange traded funds or ETFs, but I do not do individual research when it comes to the companies within those ETFs itself, because thinking of something like that S&P 500, you have 504 companies within an ETF. I am not going to do the research on 500 plus companies. For me, the time is not there. The diversification is there when I'm investing in that ETF, and it does make a big difference with the time and effort that we do put in there. Again, I like the investing side a little bit more simplified. I don't want the complexity of individual stocks, which is the reason why I do not invest in those. But all right, guys, so that is going to do it for today's video. 6 ways to invest tiny sums of money according to Warren Buffett. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next video.